Welcome to the Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel podcast. I'm your guest host, Paul LaFontaine, known in the community as LaFondios. Our episode today is a special one, as we have representatives from Little Wars TV and Mark's Game Room who opposed each other in an 1862 Civil War scenario that took place over 5 days in game time in the Eastern Theater. It was played from April to August 2024. The game was run by 17 umpires from the International Kriegsspiel Society and played by 12 primary players from Mark's Game Room and Little Wars TV. The primary players had 2 or 3 aides supplied by the IKS. As experienced tabletop players, we'll discuss their experience of Kriegsspiel and their takeaways. If you like what you see today, hit the like and subscribe buttons and come check out the International Kriegsspiel Society at kriegspiel.org. Now to the podcast. Little Wars TV and Mark's Game Room, welcome to the podcast.
All right. Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's our absolute honor to have you here in the, I guess, James, we're calling it the first annual Kriegsspiel Cup, which was actually the idea of Miles's idea, so we just ran with it.
Wait, there was a cup involved with this?
There is now.
There was a cup involved in this.
There is now.
There is now. We had to quickly scramble to go find the cup because we so value your partnership and your friendship that we quickly had to go get that going. But James, why don't you go ahead and walk us through the idea you had for this, and then we'll introduce everyone on the podcast to get who they are and what roles they played.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. So the International Kriegsspiel Society had been thinking about a game that we could run for and with the Little Wars TV guys, but when we saw Sean from Mark's Game Room join our group, we thought it'd be really fun to host a game between the Little Wars TV and the Mark's Game Room wargaming clubs. And so we invited both of them, and they were very interested and ended up doing it. And so when we thought of scenarios to play, there's a lot to choose from, but we have a nice operational map that covers the Eastern campaign of the American Civil War. And so we wanted to host an operational level Civil War game, but we love doing twists, as I know both these groups do as well. And so what we did is we said, what if McClellan, rather than do the Peninsula campaign in 1862, he decided to go overland and just go straight south, and how would Johnston face that? And so that was our starting scenario in the game we played, is what would happen in that scenario. Great. Let's go ahead and go around the room, the virtual room, and everyone please introduce yourself, which group you're affiliated with, which role you played, obviously, and which side. So I'm going to just call out your names as we go around as I have you here. Chris, why don't you start off?
Hi, my name's Chris Graw. I guess I'm affiliated with Little Wars TV now, and I played the role of D.H. Hill, which I learned is not the same as A.P. Hill.
It's always important to learn new things in these events, and it looks like you got a big one there. That's good. Mark, with the most unique background of all of us, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, I'm Mark from Mark's Game Room, the Mark himself. I played Union 4th Corps, General Keyes, and it was a super awesome game, and thanks so much for running. We had a great time.
Thanks, Mark. Carl, go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Hey, I'm Carl. I played for Mark's Game Room in this scenario, and I played as General Edwin Sumner, which was quite a good time.
Great. Ed, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Ed. I'm with Little Wars TV. I played Joe Johnston, CNC for the Confederacy.
Excellent. Miles?
I'm Miles Reedy. I'm also with Little Wars TV, and I played General Smith, commander of the Confederate Center Wing.
Excellent. And Greg, I feel terrible asking you guys who you are, because we all know who you are. But Greg, tell us about yourself.
I'm Greg, playing with Little Wars TV, and I was Major General Thomas J. Jackson, detached way out in the Shenandoah Valley. So I was off on my own adventure for this campaign.
But indeed covered a lot of mileage if you look at the after-action review. So let's go ahead and hear about the plans. We had a pretty sprawling scenario. It took 5 days of game time, although it took nearly 3 months of real time. Why don't we go ahead and start? Ed, you were the General Johnson. Why don't you talk a little bit about your plans and your thoughts and how you were going to approach the campaign?
Well, we had an elaborate, well thought out plan that was completely wrong. We were absolutely certain the Confederates were going to come down Telegraph Road. No, that didn't happen. It's a good thing that I decided we should wait and make sure they were really coming at all. Otherwise, we would have skedaddled down to the Rappahannock or worse. And then I presume President Davis would have sacked me right then and there.
There you go.
I purposely let Greg fend for himself as Stonewall Jackson because while he would be valuable on the battlefield as always, I thought that there might be a political element to the game. And with Greg running amok in the rear, I thought that might get some sort of action from Lincoln to call it off. That was the whole reason for that. And also to drain off Union resources that were pointed at us.
Okay. And how about the remainder of your corps, and what was your thinking in terms of how you deployed them?
Well, I wanted to stay a little bit compact, but and I'm not a Civil War guy, but this is what I have: Patty Griffith's Battle in the Civil War. That's it. I read Coddington once too. So I saw in the after-action reports that people were amused at how spread out we became. I was equally amused as it was happening, and yet I'll be darned if I could figure out how to stop it, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
We had John coming in as General Magruder, and I sent him to the Telegraph Road, the southern portion down around. Now, see that's it. You have this lovely map, and I don't know the Civil War all that well. So
Okay.
yeah, so we were initially split up, and I was fearful that the Union would get together and deliver a knockout punch early, but happily they didn't.
Okay. So, Mark, let's hear about the Union side. Let's hear about the opposite perspective.
All right. Well, we had 5 corps. One was General Banks, who was in the valley.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the other 4 corps that were around Alexandria, Virginia. And we all got together to figure out a plan. And Sean Barnett was McClellan, so he kind of was the CNC who made the final say. He's not here, so I'll kind of give my perspective from the 4th Corps. But we had a big talk about what we wanted to do, and it seemed like there was a real concern as to what Jackson would do. Right, that was kind of the big, right, Carl? That was the big discussion, right? And it was, should we detach more corps to go join Banks and crush Gregg, which would have been glorious? But, we decided not to do that because if we did that, we felt we would leave Washington open. So the idea was Banks would try to fight Jackson, and then the rest of the army would go on our merry way to Mordor to try to find the Confederates. And, basically there was the railroad, the main railroad, the Orange, I think it was Alexandria Railroad. And, having never played it before, I mean, I just had not too much time to kind of read the rules. When we started the game, it was a very busy period with my family. So I kind of was like, I guess we need to stick to the railroad. And McClellan was like, yes, let's stick to the railroad. We'll move forward with 3 corps kind of in front and 1 corps kind of in back, leaning towards the valley in case something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of it. It was to kind of move forward, find and pin the Confederates, and our reserve corps would kind of swing to where we wanted to put our punch. And so I was in the back, and 4th Corps was the last to leave Alexandria. And we just headed off into the night. That was our plan.
Okay. And why was it that why was Jackson the fear? What was the multiple corps on the Confederate side? What was it about Jackson that
So
caused?
I mean, I don't think we didn't know what the rest of the army was, because we were thinking this is historical, but it's probably not totally historical, right? So we weren't
Right.
sure exactly what there was. And I think there was just a fear that, in most games, when you play a war game, Jackson's good, right? And his troops are better, and Banks is a clown, and his troops aren't as good. And
Right.
so I think there was just a general fear that in a one-to-one fight, Banks was going to get beat. And then we have Jackson in our rear. And so what do we do? So I had a feeling there was almost a sense of like paralysis about that at the higher level, right? That Jackson was the key to the Confederate plan. And I don't think we had going into the battle, we had a clear idea what we were going to do, other than Banks was going to try to fight him, and then we just kind of go from there. And all of it, and certainly, I think our high command was just expecting Banks to be beat. So,
Got it. So let's hear from Jackson himself. Greg, what was your orders? And since you didn't even know you were famous on the Union side prior to all this happening, what was your orders and your perspective? Because you said you operated somewhat on your own out there.
We also had a pretty lengthy, pre-campaign conference among all the Confederate commanders about what to do, and what to do with Jackson's corps was also a big focus of that conversation, because it's so detached from the rest of the army. Do you join the rest of the army in order to bolster the strength, or do you try to operate out on your own in the valley? And I mean, I think we all came to the conclusion that it would give the Federals a lot more headaches to have Jackson just kind of roaming out there on the flank. It would give them something to worry about. And the real question, of course, was what were they going to do about it? And our hope was that they would detach multiple corps to come and siphon off, and that I would just roam around on the flank, distracting them and buying time. And if they didn't do that, then I could maneuver into McClellan's rear. And my goal, if you look at the what happened in the campaign, my goal was to leave the valley immediately. I had no interest in fighting Banks. I just hoped Banks might hunker down in Harper's Ferry, and I was immediately moving to leave the valley to try to get into McClellan's rear to raise some hell back there. That part of the plan worked. The part that got pretty interesting from my perspective was the complete lack of information that you have in a double blind game like this. It took quite a while for me to even realize like what was happening. Was Banks pursuing me or not? Was the Federal Army detaching anybody else to come after me or not? Because if they were going to do that, not having that information puts you in a pretty tight spot. And I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but there was a moment.
It's quite a difficult mission when you are the spoiler out away from the main body, and yet with the fog of war, you don't have the information. So spoiling becomes that much harder.
Definitely became much more challenging. I'm sure fog of war is something that everybody was dealing with, but yeah, it made my job pretty interesting and quite fun.
Carl, you were with the Union forces. What did it look like as Jackson was out and that Banks was going out to try to at least interfere with Jackson? What were you hearing on your side of it?
It's interesting. I think I was the first person to cite the Confederates down south. And so I have a tendency, I mean, I'm a very aggressive player. I like to just charge heedlessly most of the time. And so because our top-down orders were very defensive, right? We were trying to form a defensive line. It was a really mixed, it was like, oh, but I can see them right there. I want to go after these guys. And so I sort of saw the whole Banks situation. We were getting dispatches, and I just sort of put it out of mind because I kind of at least from my perspective, it felt like we outnumbered the rebels significantly enough that we would be able to dispense with them pretty easily. And that was before one of our corps was sent away.
Okay. Great. How did it look from your perspective, Miles? You were what was your relationship to the main Confederate body?
Yeah, I was in the center and made contact with the Union first. And at the start of the game, we immediately fell back from the Bull Run River to the Broad Run and set up a defensive position. And I think one of the reasons everything became so spread out is the way we all interpreted the rules. You could only cross at very select points. I don't think anybody tried to build any pontoon bridges or anything like that. And so we would just put our brigades at different points, and the Union would match us. And we fixed Second Corps pretty quickly. Even with the artful kind of screen things, trying to hide the unit numbers, you could kind of guesstimate who was there. And then I think Ed and I came up with the strategy that we wanted the Union to always go to the west, because that was just a longer way around. And we did two things. One is we created a fake dispatch about Operation Damocles and a concentration of Confederate troops in Gum Springs, which I think I may have actually sent them to Jackson, which may not have made Greg's day easier. But we sent that. I think that helped. And then we created out of my unit, a 10, 20 man unit of telegraph operators. We snuck up to the southwest of Alexandria, and were able to tap into the telegraph lines. And we would periodically get information if it was unencoded.
I had nothing to do with any of this. Miles is being too generous. All these crazy shenanigans, it's entirely his. I guess that's how one becomes a captain of industry.
So apparently Jackson wasn't the only one wandering off the reservation.
Well,
I wouldn't say he was wandering off the reservation, but
we would hear things like that's how we heard about the Banks ambush, because Greg couldn't get any dispatches to us, and so we had no idea. But we find out little glimpses of that. That was really useful because we knew that the Union had kind of pulled off, pulled troops back, and that's why when we decided to counterattack. On the second day of the campaign, Ed and I were talking about, we're going to get outflanked. We got to fall back to the Rappahannock. Literally, that was our conversation. Right. That's when we hatched Damocles as a diversion, and then we figured out, when John got up there, we have a chance to launch counterattack, and the counterattack was actually pretty successful. It wasn't decisive, but it pushed them back, back across the Bull Run, and I think the game ended at that point.
Well, I have to ask the question, Mark. Did you and Carl's did Operation Damocles fool you completely and have you go into Gum Springs?
So, I was on the total opposite other side.
Okay.
So this is all I heard of it was John's counterattack hit me. And there's a really fun, interesting story about that, but we can talk about that later, right? Sure. And so I'm fighting tooth and nail, and it's bad. And I finally am able to get to McClellan's, personally sit there and talk to him. And I said, okay, I need more guys. I need a couple divisions over here.
Right.
And Carl was next to me. And I said, so Carl needs to send me a couple divisions. And he said, well, Carl only has one. He sent all his other ones up to Gainesville. And I was like, you kidding me? And so basically, probably our least aggressive player had 5 divisions. Carl had 1 and I had 3, and I was facing all these crazy maniac rebels. I don't know how they got there. I don't really know how much the dispatches. All I know is when I asked for those guys, they were far away.
Okay.
So it worked in some way.
Yeah.
So James, make a note of Operation Damocles. We're going to ask you as the umpire what happened with that, but we want to hear from Chris. Chris, what was your mission and your perspective as things unfolded from your side?
So I was Smith way out on the left flank, of the Confederate line, really only in touch with Miles as General Smith and then Ed as Johnston. And I only barely knew what was going on with Miles. I found out about all the wacky shenanigans later, almost at the same time as the Union. But like Miles had said, we kind of talked ourselves into that. Oh, the Union's going to come down the Telegraph Road so they can be supplied by the Potomac. Well, that didn't happen. And then I was arguing for a defense in depth because we're wedged in between the Blue Ridge Mountains and kind of like the swampy, foresty area to the west of the Potomac. So, um,
Right.
like Miles said, we fell back from the Bull Run. We entrenched ourselves at the Broad Run. I built a ton of defensive positions between Buckland and Greenwich, and then we had almost talked ourselves into falling back to the I think it was the Cedar Run or the Rappahannock, and then I I don't know, all of a sudden the Union, like there were a couple little skirmishes, and then all of a sudden the Union just
Uh-huh.
started falling back, and unlike Greg, who's way out in the middle of nowhere, I also don't have any idea what's going on practically, and I'm right next to the action, but it's just I guess we're going north now. It just all happened so fast, even if it did take a couple of months of real lifetime.
There you go. Okay. James, we've now heard some of the individual perspectives. Obviously, we don't have all the players here. Why don't you go back and kind of weave some of this together? Don't forget Operation Damocles, of course. But I think if I looked at the AAR correctly, it was a I guess we could say a marginal Confederate victory. But go ahead and walk us through the 5 days of game time.
Sure. Excuse me. So it was a Confederate victory in the end. What I saw was, as described, the Union pushed pretty quickly southwest. They were a big group. The Union did outnumber the Confederates enough that if they could bring their numbers to bear, they would win the fight. In addition to having the numbers, the Confederates had Jackson spread out way to the west, and then Magruder started off pretty far south as well. And so it was really just D.H. Hill and Smith, that were up north that could take the brunt of the Union attack initially. So the Confederates had to bring up Magruder pretty quickly, and then Jackson was racing east, and as Greg described, he got about a day ahead of Banks, and then he laid a trap for Banks, which we can talk about later, but he had a little bit of his own trickery and some false messages and dispatches laid behind that were picked up by Banks that factored into his ambush. And so he was able to ambush Banks. And then I can't remember if this happened before or after, but basically somewhere in the middle, McClellan decided to send Heintzelman to assist Banks in chasing after Jackson. And I would say that was probably the most decisive decision of the campaign, because it basically took Heintzelman out of the picture to where now there's 3 corps left to face the Confederates, who now have Magruder on their side. And Heintzelman, Jackson almost got completely surrounded and caught, but his foot cavalry always gave the Union the slip. And so by the end of the game, he was in Harper's Ferry, and Banks and Heintzelman were east of him. Never were able to quite catch him. And then down south along the Broad Run, the Union, the best I can describe it is they got wet feet. I think McClellan, whether it was on purpose or an accident, Sean played McClellan to a T, because he met the Confederates, he got cold feet, and then he set defensive. And then he even started pulling his forces back and leaving certain crossings and fords open, which Miles as Smith started exploiting. They started to get on the flank of Sumner, and so all of a sudden the Confederates are on the offensive, pushing the Union back, and the Union kept leaving different flanking options open, so they'd hold a line, the Confederates would get around, flank them, and start pushing them back even more. And so by the end of the 5 days, McClellan's talking about going back to Washington. Lincoln's not happy, and it's a Confederate victory. So
there you go.
Very well played.
So Ed, did the Jackson Gambit work? I guess it did.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think so.
I think that
And
it was
Operation Damocles.
decisive,
Okay.
totally, because Austin, I saw him yesterday. He came visit me here, and it was the first time I had been able to see him since the game, so I can tell you what he said, give his perspective. Sure. He was like, I didn't fight one battle. I marched left, I marched right, I marched back, I marched up. And so he was a bit frustrated because he originally went to support our First Corps in like the Gainesville area, and they were going to launch a big attack there. And right when he kind of got in position, then he was ordered to go try to hunt down Jackson. So then he turned around and he went to hunt down Jackson. And then he was doing that, and then I was fighting on Cedar Run, like just really viciously doing everything I could. And I was like, Sean, I need some more troops. I can't cover all these places you want me to cover. So then he ordered Heinzelman to abandon the Jackson to come help me. And so you're exactly right that Heinzelman didn't do anything the whole game. So
Right, and certainly there's a classic Kriegspiel moment where the marching simulator where it worked. Ed, talk about your initial conception of the battle, how it unfolded, and command and control a bit. So you had Jackson was probably out of contact for most of the time. Talk about what you saw, and did you have a feeling of understanding what was happening, or were things just kind of unfolding a bit out of your view?
Well, I trust Greg completely. There was no hesitation there. There was some hesitation with General Magruder from
There's a
another
lot of
campaign
complaints
game.
about Magruder
I see
throughout.
people, and it's tough to get a hold of him, and sometimes difficult to get a straight answer for him. But I thought he did his job in this game, and I'm pleased with his performance. As far as the battle itself, we quickly learned, as Chris will attest, not to launch a frontal attack. It seems pointless. So we would try and get around and get a flank, and if we could get 2-to-1 odds, we'd go in. And that seemed to work just fine.
Okay. Greg, talk about the bank's ambush and how did you pull it off? What was going on over there? Talk a little about some of your techniques.
Well, I was hoping not to fight him at all. So that was never the plan. I was hoping to maneuver into McClellan's rear and that Banks wouldn't know that I had left the valley. But Banks was much more aggressive in pursuing me than I expected. And by the time I made it to Leesburg, I realized that I had to deal with him. I wasn't going to just be able to keep moving on McClellan's rear without dealing with this. And you guys, this is my first time playing a Kriegspiel online with Discord with you, with the IKS. And you assigned each of us like an ADC or an aide, somebody who, was one of your members who was familiar. And I don't know what everybody else's ADC was like or what kind of experience they had, but mine was excellent. I really liked the person that you assigned to me. I knew him as Major Roth. And Major Roth was great to bounce ideas off of. He and I debated at length how to pull off the ambush. He gave some really great input on that, and basically, I had left some false information for Banks that I was going to be moving on Washington, D.C. rapidly, but actually I doubled around behind Hogback Mountain. We waited behind the mountain in the woods, and I had a signal station that I had set up on top of the mountain. So as soon as we saw Banks's column flying down the road into Leesburg to catch me, we just doubled back right around the mountain. I had left guys in Leesburg, and we smashed him up pretty well. But here's where the fog of war comes in. I didn't realize how badly I had smashed him up. His core was actually in horrible shape, and this was my biggest mistake of the campaign. I, after that battle, decided, well, Banks looks to have disengaged a little. I'll continue on my merry way towards Washington. Huge mistake. I should have just pursued Banks and tried to finish him. But that's the fog of war, right? You don't realize what's happening on the other side, and I didn't know how effective the ambush had been. So that was something that was fun to kind of read about in the after action report and realize that I left something on the table there.
How did that action look to the Union side, Mark and Carl? What news did you get back on that? And obviously, if the damage was greater than even Greg could see of being in the action, what did you guys see?
I heard about it, I think, when I had my one conference with McClellan. and Sean just said that he had gotten chewed up like very badly, and I think it sent a pall over Sean's thinking. But all we heard was that he got really, I think, walked into a buzzsaw was what I heard.
Right.
And bad. Yeah.
I think
Okay.
Ed and I had the best information about that from the captured telegram, because
Okay.
Banks sent an unencoded telegram kind of detailing his losses, but we couldn't get that information to Greg. And so
Right.
it made us feel good, but we couldn't do anything with it.
And did it change your actions or your perspective from your side, or did you just proceed with the plan?
We proceeded with the plan. When we started seeing them pull units out, that's when we change from completely defensive to an offensive footing.
Got it.
Just to give one other little thing about
Sure.
information and fog of war. And so Sean, some of you might know, like he works for Rand. He's an analyst, and he wrote a really detailed kind of paper for the Army about emerging technologies in the Civil War, right, particularly Gettysburg. And my understanding was he really wanted to use balloons, and I think he was really counting on getting a lot more out of the balloons than he did. And then I think when he wasn't quite getting what he wanted, it made the game more challenging for him, I guess. Because I heard that a lot, like from messages and from talking to him.
Right. Well, there was a balloon that was captured, right? What was the story there?
Right.
Who captured the balloon?
Carl, you might know more about that.
I don't actually know anything about any capture.
Oh, you're the one I captured the balloon from.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you captured the balloon. What happened?
You know what? I don't know. I think my men captured the balloon. I don't know if I can really take credit for it personally. It just kind of fell into our laps.
My aide de camp came running into the tent and said, "Grab the balloon."
Well, as a good military commander, the trick is you always give effusive credit to your men, but in doing so, you're actually taking the credit yourself. So well done there, Chris.
I do have to say,
you captured the balloon. The newspapers would report that you captured the balloon.
I do have to say, from what Mark is saying, it sounds like the balloons were not offering good intelligence, because I played the old leave just a couple of men in camp with a whole bunch of fires making noise trick while I shifted most of my divisions to the right, leaving my left flank open. And if the Union had smashed down on our left flank at that point, and I saw this in the after action report, all the umpires are like, "Oh boy, there's a giant hole in the Confederate left flank. If the Union goes down there, the Confederates are going to get rolled up," and it just never happened.
Yeah, I have no knowledge of that. Carl, do you have any sense?
Yeah. Well, what I can say is the Banks ambush is more consequential than people understand, I think. The level of kind of catastrophizing that happened in the minds of our CNC led to him asking me to send away not just my cavalry to assist Heinzelman, so I lost my kind of eyes and ears, but 2 of my 3 divisions to Gainesville. And I elected to remain with our defensive line rather than go off to Gainesville with them. But it basically meant that for the rest of the game, I was kind of like commanding brigades instead of commanding divisions, and it was a little bit like, where are my guys? When am I going to hear back? Like, are these guys going to come back? And we were waiting for General McDowell to come and save us from the West that last day, and there was a real sense that maybe with 5 divisions he could do some damage and help us. But I think after his initial strike, it seemed like he just pulled back north of the river.
Yeah, I mean, I all I can do is give like my perspective. So I came towards the east, the most east, towards Telegraph Road, kind of. And by the time I got to kind of the Broad Run area, Carl was defending it, and First Corps was to the west, and I was supposed to extend essentially Carl's flank towards the east. And the odd thing is the way the rivers go, there's Broad Run, there's kind of Cedar Run, Bull Run, which are kind of parallel. But then Cedar Run makes this crazy 90-degree turn, right? And so I I didn't think defending on that 90-degree turn made sense because then we have a salient, they can march past us. So I was lobbying to extend Carl's flank more straight. And I convinced the Army High Command I could at least use 2 divisions to do it. So I was heading out there, and who do I run into? But was it Magruder or whoever Jonathan was?
Yes, Magruder.
Magruder
Right.
around a place called Cold Store. And one of my cavalry brigades overran one of his infantry brigades. They were tired. I was a little strung out, but I wanted to just attack because I felt like they were kind of worn out. They weren't in position. It was my best option, but I needed at least a little more guys because I was just in a column. So I brought up my reserve division and I told the Army High Command what was happening, and then I was planning to attack and immediately got a message fall back. And then I was like, I moved guys, and then I said, I'm going to attack. And then I got a long message about falling back and explaining the virtues of being behind a river and blah, blah, blah. And I really wanted to attack, but then I said, well, the orders are to fall back. I should follow orders. And if he's telling me this, he's probably not going to support me. Like nothing's going to come help me in this attack.
Right.
So I decided, okay, I should follow orders. Sean must have a bigger plan. The problem was I had to fall back into this salient. So it was awful. Like I was in this awful salient. I could barely cover everything. And essentially, if I could have lasted one more turn, I probably could have fallen everyone back and guarded the entire river. But then Carl let me down, got overrun, and hit my flank and crushed our flank. And then after that, I just never had enough troops to cover everything. And I was just always behind the 8 ball, right? So that was
That's
kind of my
It's a great command moment, right? You
yeah.
had an idea to attack, you had the opportunity, and then the order comes, and so you got to make that decision: do I follow the order? Do I take advantage of the situation?
The only thing I can tell you, Mark, is there's one silver lining because we had set a trap for you because you overran that one brigade of John's.
Yeah.
I was hitting your right flank with 12 brigades, and you walked away. Like I jumped into that cold store area, and there's nobody from Fourth Corps around.
Yeah, but I had a lot more stuff that you probably didn't see.
Yeah. So
Right?
there were 2 opportunities that the Union had to really wreck the Confederacy. One was then because Magruder had done a night march, so his men
He
had
was
he
exhausted.
hadn't slept the night. His men were absolutely exhausted, and that's when Mark ran into them. And had he been able to push like he wanted, he would have just overrun and wiped out Magruder entirely. The other,
And I was so
yeah,
concerned that was going to happen. I had issued orders to Smith and Hill to launch a ridiculous attack. Happily, it didn't make it to Miles, and I assumed it didn't make it to Port Crisp. In fact, it did, and Crisp launched an attack on my orders.
yeah,
That
yeah. The
failed.
other opportunity was, I think, on day 2, Heinzelman, McDowell, and maybe one other corps, or 2.5 corps were there right on top of, or right above D.H. Hill. And had they attacked then, D.H. Hill would have been, he was kind of separated, cut off, outnumbered. He would have been overrun, and it would have been a different story. But that's when Heinzelman got sent north instead of attacking south. So those were the 2 main missed Union opportunities for taking out the Confederates.
I was constantly worried, and I think it was with Carl. Carl, you were Second Corps, right? So I think you and I think, kept having some skirmishes in the Gainesville Haymarket area, and I'd get the umpire reports back saying, "Oh, you had a skirmish, and yeah, you got a little beat up. The Union probably got a little more beat up, and you'd fall back." And I'd be fatigued. I'm like, "Okay, well, there's the one punch. Where's the two punch? Because where's the hordes of Union infantry marching down from Washington? If they hit me now when I'm at weaker, I'm not going to be able to hold the line." But that second punch just never came.
Yeah, I mean, we were never really attacking, which was that was my frustration, and I was like, we're never going to win by running away,
Right.
right? And I kept asking, like, where are we going to generate some combat power? Where's the attack going to come?
Yeah,
And
there
it
were a
just never
lot of
happened.
midnight, like going to his tent, trying to argue
Trying
for
to argue the point.
being released to
Well, we'll have
attack.
to get
It
him
was,
get his perspective on
Yeah,
a
you definitely
different
should.
conversation.
yeah.
Let's take it around. I'd love we have six very experienced table gamers. Certainly, you know your way around these different situations in the command. Talk about how, and we just go around the horn, how your decision making changed based on the fog of war, and what you found yourself actually altering in terms of the way you made decisions. Chris, why don't you go ahead and start for us?
I think the fog of war probably made me more cautious and defensive. I think I mentioned before I was advocating for a defense in depth strategy because I didn't know it was coming at us. And because of the fog war, I'm like, okay, we'll fight. We'll keep falling back. We'll extend their lines. We'll extend their lines. We'll find some opportunity because I was a little nervous about pushing forward until, um, I got the orders from Ed. And I think Miles was just naturally more aggressive. And that kind of pushed us forward as well.
Okay. Mark, how did you find yourself making your decisions differently, if you did?
I It's a good question. I love double blind games. I love this kind of thing. I mean, really, the biggest question was that cold store thing, and
Mm-hmm.
that was probably the time I had the most intelligence. I could see the most of the Confederates, and I guess because of the fog of war, I just went with the overall commander's decision instead of just doing what I wanted. So that was
Yeah.
probably
Okay.
my decision.
Good
Yeah.
observation. Carl, you describe yourself as a man who heedlessly charges forward. How did you find yourself changing that style?
Yeah, no heeds. No, I have to say, I really, the desperate, like, clutching for information. Like, my cavalry was like this security blanket where I was constantly like, oh, what are they going to say? Can I send them out to do this or do this? Like, those poor men were going to be ridden to death by all my doing that, and the balloon only, increased my, like, desire to know everything. And I think,
Yeah.
um, learning to accept not having perfect information was a huge part of it. I also, the big difference from tabletop is just the utter lack of civility with Miles attempting to assassinate me during completely perfidious
Well,
parlay attack.
you're presuming in your statement that when you all do tabletop gaming, you're civil to each other. We have yet to see evidence of that. So, um, excellent. I'll just keep going clockwise. Greg, how did you find your perspective in decision making change?
Well, like you said, I mean, most of us here in this interview are pretty experienced war gamers, even if
Mm-hmm.
we may not have done a Kriegspiel in this exact format before. So I think going into it, I mean, I knew that Fog of War was going to be a big part. One of the reasons early on that I made a move for Leesburg as an objective was because there was a small mountain near Leesburg with a huge open plain all around it. So I was very eager to get a signal station up there, hoping that it might enable me to see more because information is key. And it is interesting to go back when you guys posted all of the maps afterward to see what really happened because I find that the best decisions that I made in this campaign were the ones where I was the most aggressive. And the couple of decisions that I regret are when I second guessed myself and I held back a little bit. And in hindsight, those are the ones where you shouldn't have, but you can't help it, right? I mean, I think all of us at some point in this game were desperately second guessing key decisions, just a little bit nervous about our blindness,
Sure.
and that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah. It made me, just sorry to jump in, but it
Sure.
made me think a lot about this quote from Rommel, where he's like, once you hit the enemy, be the guy to shoot first, always. Right. And I think that's why I was sad I second guessed myself because I should have pulled the trigger, right? So I agree with you, Greg. I think that's right.
Miles, I think if we see you on Little Wars, we know that deception and assassination are kind of your tools of the trade anyway. But what did you do differently when it came to Fog of War?
I think the fog of war is an asymmetry. When you don't know something, you assume more than's there. So like the balloon. I assumed that balloon was an AWACS, and they could see everything on our side, and so it had much more information about us than we had about them. So I became rather cautious when I didn't know anything, and spent a lot of cycles, trying to find ways to get information advantage, like the telegraph tapping or sending the false dispatches, and would only take an offensive action when I thought we had a real advantage, and so it was a bit more cautious than I usually am in my Godmack world. And I will say, other than this character assassination, Carl's not telling you the whole story. We had set this up to get some supplies for the thousands of Union prisoners we had taken that we couldn't care for. And Carl, didn't know that I had made that number up. So obviously, he just didn't care about his men. And that affront to honor could not go unanswered.
That's right. It's good that you're the only one who's being character assassinated here, sir. Thank you. Ed, what are your thoughts as the CIC and certainly the master stroke of sending Jackson out there? How did it change your style?
Well, first let me say that coming out of into a dark night from a command tent, I too am worried what Miles is doing. It's entirely possible he'll make a run at me. But as far as the fog of war, early on in this game, I was in real danger of checking out, as it were. I mean, just reduced to a quivering, panicky idiot. And then I thought, well, Greg told me to read Sam Grant's book, and I remembered that. And I thought to myself, well, darn it, what would Grant do? He would have a plan and implement it, and not attribute superhuman powers to the other side, which is what I was doing. And I told myself that Miles is having fun with this game. You might as well do too. So that's that.
Brilliant. I guess that might be a compliment to Sam Grant, which would be Miles is having fun, so I might as well too. James, as the lead umpire and the enormous amount of energy and work you and the team put into this, all the way from yourself down to the two ICs that were able to help. Why don't you give us a wrap up and your thoughts on the game and just give us your overview.
Sure, thanks, Paul. Yeah, we had 17 umpires from the International Kriegsspiel Society help run it, and so every turn was run by a different umpire. It was a lot of chaos to manage, not on just the player side, but the umpire side. But the International Kriegsspiel Society really showed up. Everybody had at least 2 ADCs to help write dispatches, to bounce ideas off of, and they were instrumental. I know they all had a lot of fun and enjoyed it a lot. From the International Kriegsspiel Society, it was absolute joy to watch. Everyone did very well. They got up to speed quickly on how things work with such the fog of war, and it was just an absolute blast to run the game and see it happen.
Awesome. We want to thank you all for coming. We know you all are notables in the industry, and you do a lot for the hobby, and we really appreciate it. And you inspire us. We were very happy to provide this experience for you, and we really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Well, thanks so much. That was a great experience.
It was a wonderful game, and I'm sure we cannot imagine the amount of work that went into pull it off, and we're very grateful for the experience.
Yeah,
I think a special shout out to whoever made the amazing map.
Damon, our graphic arts specialist, he is an amazing guy. He really does a fantastic job. So, thanks very much, everybody, and that concludes the podcast.
Thank
See
you.
in the second annual
All right, guys,
cup.
thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegspiel podcast, where we talk about all things Kriegspiel. Come join us for live and play-by-post scenarios in our Discord server and check out our website through the link in the show notes. We'll see you out there.